What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 133 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy.
Ahoy, ahoy, Max. We are on a rock block this week, you and I, huh?
We really are. We're doing it. We're killing it.
Yeah, we're doing some. We got some great episodes this week. Of course, over on Nintendo Noise, we had a really fun one. You and I, just yesterday, right? Recorded
Yeah.
our interview with Abu, the developer of Tales of Kenzera Zao, which you can check out on Steam Deck Podcast tomorrow. And today we are here with a an embargoed review right at release time. We're right there with
Yeah.
IGN and Eurogamer and all the big dogs today. All right, we're here to talk about Pepper Grinders.
Yeah, we are really excited for that we were able to sort of get a copy of this game and that you've been able to be playing it because this is one we spoke about before on the Steam Deck podcast as part of the Steam Next Fest demo. I was very, very sort of positive about it, and you said then I want to review this one. This is one I want to play, and obviously I look out for you, so we made it happen. And
Yeah.
why don't you sort of give the intro to Pepper Grinder as a game for those that don't listen to the Steam Deck podcast? You, Andrew Valentine, or anyone else that might not.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best way to put it is I- I've been thinking of it as it's a momentum based 2D platformer. So I think if you are wondering what I mean by that, I think the games that immediately come to mind for me when I think about kind of what uh where this game's influences seem to come from, what its DNA is. It reminds me of games like Celeste and Super
Mhm.
Meat Boy and Sonic the Hedgehog a little bit, in the fact that it's very about momentum. It's very about like creating momentum and like properly maintaining it as you are navigating hazards and kind of moving through these sections that are a combination of kind of like more traditional like tight platforming and then some kind of like environmental puzzles, right? And that's where I think like the kind of the Meat Boy Celeste of it all really comes through for me, where there's a lot of moments where it'll either be kind of like very short sections where you're going kind of through a lot of hazards, or it'll be like those longer ones where it's like you're chaining multiple different hazards together and you're kind
Mhm.
of seeing the design elements begin to build on each other, and you have this kind of like and that's where it feels like Sonic to me a lot, where you have that moment of like, where you start to see the level for what it is and like the ways you can interact with it. And that
Mhm.
the first time you're playing through it, there's like hesitance and you're trying to like get your feet wet. And then when you're doing your time trials later on and you're doing just trying to get your best run and you kind of have all those elements memorized and you can start to see how they chain together and you get that really fun, frenetic, you know, like thrilling moment to moment gameplay that you get in those more fast paced
Mhm.
action platformers is it's really really cool. And then you have boss fights at the end of every region that are very different, right? Because they are more like arena style, something like
Mhm.
akin to like Cuphead or whatever. But still, with that core mechanic of the drill and about like creating momentum, like by using the ground defensively and then offensively, to kind of like in some of the pre-release materials, they describe the way that Pepper moves as being like influenced by how dolphins swim. And I
Mhm.
think
Yeah.
that's really interesting because that's something that like you see a lot, where it'll be like you are in a piece of dirt and you're doing loops and you're trying to figure out like where you're going to go next, and you have this sense of like, okay, I'm going to go up and I'm going to shoot myself up and then loop and then shoot this way and catch this hook and
Mhm.
wrap myself and dodge these spikes and uh just I had several moments, but I was surprised how deep in the game I was having moments where I was like very impressed by their ability to meaningfully iterate on the core mechanic, right, of the drill, and how that influences combat, how that influences traversal, and then how when they do change things up, right, like when they do introduce like new hazards, like like one of the first ones. 'Cause I don't want to spoil things for people too much, but like one of the first levels is you get introduced to the concept of swimming and how, like, when you're underwater, rather than like kind of drilling and like building momentum the way you do in dirt, you're kind of just like, floating and going through. And that same, you know, level that introduces the underwater concept also introduces two different hazards, which are these like thorns that
Hmm.
will, if you touch them, you'll explode, and like they'll kind of shake as you get closer. So like you have like that pixel chance, I think, of like getting, caught by it. And then there's also bombs, like mines that'll explode if you touch them. So you have this like, okay, I'm in a level where I'm uh engaging with the environment in a way that I haven't yet, and there's two new hazards I've never seen before. And I have to learn how to do all of those things in the same level. And then later on, they all get introduced again, but in different concepts. So it'll be like I'm in a level where I'm in dirt, but then there's also the bramble, the thorns, right? And like that changes the way I interact with, you know, that as a hazard, because I have a lot more momentum and speed when I'm in the dirt, right? So you can like get this really great sense of them teaching you mechanics in ways that are friendly, but not ever where it feels like kind of the criticism that I remember I had of Super Mario Wonder, right? Where it's like, because there's so many mechanics and because you don't always get a chance to see them like more than a handful of times, like there's not as much opportunity for iteration and for you to
Hmm.
have these moments of like seeing how those mechanics can be evolved and recontextualized by changing their context, rather than just like, this is the level with the thorns, this is the level with the bombs, this is the level where you're underwater. And I really appreciate that, because when you get down to it, there's really, I think, only they give you a game manual here, and it looks like they list 12 hazards.
Yeah.
I'm not remembering if there's one here that I'm not remembering, but I think that's all of them, right? So the fact that there's like 12 key hazards, and then like four what they call advanced moves, which are like different types of terrain
Yeah.
interaction, which is like the boosting that you do with the drill to like shoot yourself out of the water like the dolphin and get momentum. There's a grappling hook that you can use at certain times. There's the swimming, and then there's like skimming, where you like ride across water like it's like a
I
jet
remember
ski.
this. Yep.
Um, so again, it's like you have a fairly small number of variables, but across the four major regions and each of those levels that are in each section, right? You see those evolve and get kind of played with a lot. And when you get to those last few levels where all of them are getting brought in at once, it's extremely, extremely satisfying moment to
Yep.
moment, because you have that sense of like, it's how it feels like when, like you said, when you're getting to the end of some of those other like really, high skill floor games where like, it's easy to pick up, but the fun comes from the mastering of it,
Yeah.
and like really learning how those systems interact and getting that perfect run and trimming off time, and finding all the secrets and getting the secret levels and all that kind of stuff.
I have been desperate to interrupt you this whole time, but I wanted to let you go on and on and on because you clearly had a lot to say there, and there was a lot of good information in
I
there.
haven't
I'm
been allowed to
jumping.
talk to anybody about it.
I know. I know exactly how you feel. Now I'm going to bring this right back to sort of the very beginning of what you were saying when you were
Okay.
saying um, that it reminds you of things like Super Meat Boy and Celeste. Now the key difference with this one appears to be that there's combat or there's enemies, whereas those games don't necessarily have combat enemies; they just have hazards.
Yeah.
So, talk to me about some of the enemies you'll see and how the combat works and things like that. And then I want to get onto bosses after as well. I want to talk
Sure.
about them.
So I think that's kind of an interesting thing about it, that like there are like overworld like mob enemies, but I think a lot of times they feel more like obstacles than they feel like enemies.
Okay.
Cause there's like there's certain types, like there's one of the standard enemies is like all of them are some subsection of this like narwhal race. Like they all have like narwhal horns, and they're kind of like these dopey
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
looking, they have like real like kind of slack jawed mouths and stuff. And there's two varieties that just have like a weapon, right? Like one of them has a pickaxe, and one of them has like a big like knife. It's like a chef, and both of them are pretty standard enemies, where it's just like they run up and you attack them, or you jump over them, and you can kind of like Shovel Knight bounce off some of them and stuff like that. Depends on the guy. Um, there's another one that's a rifleman that has a gun and is like a little bit more strong, and that can be a little bit more problematic. So those mobs all feel like more traditional enemies where like you're running through a level, they'll come up, you either engage with them or you get around them, right? As quickly as you can. A lot of the other ones are they feel more akin to hazards than enemies, but, like, they're destroyable, right? Because like,
Mhm.
one of the common ones is, like, there's a guy who's got, like, a little copter, and he's just, like, throwing projectiles at you. There's one that's similar to the rifleman, but he's got bombs, and he flings them at you and stuff like that. So there's a lot and there's, like, some that are, like, on little planes or on little, like, speeder bikes or, like, on, artillery cannons, and, you know, they all feel way more akin to just something you're dealing with as you're platforming and like having to navigate around them and around their fire. And then, like, sometimes during that kind of, like I said, you'll have the moment where I get in a piece of dirt and I'm spinning, waiting to figure out where I'm going to go next. And it'll be like, great, I'll jump up here and I'll take out that enemy and take out that enemy. And then I can zip across here. And it feels more the way that you kinda deal with, like, spikes and stuff like that in something like Meat Boy, or the way that you deal with, like, a spinning blade, right, or something like that, where it's like, yeah, it's an enemy and it's a finite move, but the you're very rarely sitting still, I think, in this game. So that's one of the other things is that aside from those enemies that do just kinda come up and confront you in the more traditional platforming sections, when you're getting into, like, the really heavy drill stuff, which is most of the game, um, there's not a ton of opportunities for enemies that aren't, obstacles. And I think it's
Yeah, yeah,
interesting
yeah.
because, like, in the booklet that we were talking about, they have an enemy section, but if you go back up to that hazards that I mentioned, there's actually two different types of uh hazards, right? One of which is a poison beetle and one's a drill beetle that I thought of as enemies because you
Okay.
can attack them and they'll go away. So it's like, I don't know, like
They sort of blur into one. An enemy is an obstacle is an enemy,
yeah.
and yeah, all
And,
to be avoided. The difference is you can just destroy certain, the ones you can destroy and ones you can't destroy, I guess.
right, because most of the hazards are like not like that. They're not things you can
Yeah.
interact with like that. So yeah, it's like I think when I think of the game's combat, I think of the boss fights, really, which is interesting
Yeah.
because that's, I guess, not super representative of what the combat is always like moments. But I mean, I guess it is, right? Like it's still about you using that dolphin technique and the boosts and like using that to break guards and not get hit by a enemy that has a weapon that can swing over your head as you're trying to jump and things like that. So like, yeah, it's funny because like combat is there and it's good, but I think it feels like it's more an element of traversal. Like the game is all
Yeah.
about traversal, it's almost like I mean, I guess the Sonic the Hedgehog comparison comes back up there again, right? Where they're
Those enemies are obstacles, aren't they? You're
yeah,
not stopping to take them out, you're just going through them or hopping on their heads to get somewhere, it's not
right.
like you're stopping and going, "Right, let me." It's not like it's in, like, I don't know, Dead Cells or Dark Souls where you can't swim and you're like, "Right, I'm gonna take on this enemy, and then I'm gonna move on, and there's something this
Or
enemy gives me,"
or
right?
even
It
something
drops
like
something for me.
Or even something like Mario, where, like, I think of, like, the Hammer
Mhm.
Bros and how, like, there are, like, enemies like that will cause you to, like there are enemies that you're kinda supposed to just get by as you're moving, but then there's some that'll cause you to, like, break stride and be like, "Okay, I need to move a certain way and get around you or get underneath you and pop," and, like, like, you have to kinda change the way you're progressing. And I feel
Mhm.
like it's more about that. It's more about, "Oh, you thought you had momentum. Now there's an enemy here. How are you gonna get around him? Or how are you gonna take him out while you're continuing to go without breaking your
Mhm, yeah,
stride?"
yeah.
You know? And I think it's cool that, like, there are opportunities where, like, because the game, like, does encourage you to do, like, speed run and, like, time trial and stuff like that, like, you can totally see where there are sections that are like, "Oh, if I take a hit here, I can skip all of this stuff and go," like, it's built in such a way where, like, you can kind of metagame it as well and be like,
Okay.
because you don't get a lot of health drops, which is the other thing. It's like the game is pretty tough and it's not super forgiving when it comes to health. You can buy temporary armor at the in-game shop with your treasure, but once it's gone, it's gone. And if you
Yeah.
die on a level and do another run, you don't get it back. So like, there's stuff like that where like And it does have some good accessibility options too. Like you can slow the speed of the game down like by as much as half.
Yeah.
And then there's like certain button stuff that you can like there's like moments where you need to button mash like during boss fights and stuff that you can automate. So there's like I think a good amount of tools to make it again much like Celeste, right? And I feel bad like comparing a new game to other games so much, but I hope that I'm comparing it to exclusively games that are excellent.
Yeah, yeah,
Um
yeah, I mean, yeah, so
s-
far you are.
Speaks of my praise for it. Like I'm not
Mhm.
trying to say that it's akin to those games and that it's like, oh, it's the next one. It's like this one. It's like no, it's special in the same way that those games are special and that it stands out, right? Like it's got that same level of quality. And I was gonna say, like, that was I think one of the things that Celeste did really well of like this is a very hard game and the easy mode isn't easy. It's like you can kind of tone things down based on like what your ability is, right? Or
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what your disability maybe.
Yeah, so
Um,
you can sort of pick and choose how what makes, because I remember Celeste being amazing. You guys spoke about it a couple of weeks ago about you could change so many different things that would allow you to sort of plow through the game or just give yourself like a challenge that you think is fair. Um, as opposed to as what the developer maybe thought is fair or what some people, the get good crowd, what they think is fair.
right. And as if you want that, that's there. That's the base experience, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But and I think that is something that I think it does really well as well. Like it's definitely a challenging game. Um, Particularly some of the later boss fights I found to be really one of them in particular I found to be very difficult. Um, your mileage may vary, right? Like there's certainly, I think some people mesh with different styles of game better, right? So like a boss fight that I found difficult, you might be like, "What are you talking about?" But whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Also, right, like I'm playing it with no one else to talk to and no like I'm going in fresh, right? I'm learning the strategy.
There are no guides. There are no guides for you.
Yeah, anything like that. So,
Mhm.
and I think it is in a really good spot where to me, it feels very akin to how I feel during like when I'm playing Shovel Knight or when I'm playing like Mega Man or something like that, where it's like, yeah, or Celeste, whatever, right? Where it's like, yeah, like you're gonna take some L's, like you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna have to do runs over again. There's specific levels that like there was a specific section that I remember doing 20, 30 times before I got it right,
Yeah.
and but I never got to that point where I was like frustrated and was like, I got to put this down. I'm annoyed by it. Right. It very much lends itself to, oh, one more run. I almost got it. I almost got it. Like
Yeah.
I'm learning the language of the game and it's teaching me in a way that I want to keep learning, even if I am, you know, um, hitting a wall. Right. And like not progressing and like not and feeling like I'm you know, getting stunted, I guess. Right. But you wanna overcome that. You wanna get back in the ring and try again.
That's, well, a lot of what you're saying is reminding me of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. I'm not sure if that's a game that you played, but,
Not to completion. I've played,
mhm.
like, the first couple worlds when they brought it to
Okay.
Switch.
Well, a lot of what you're saying there sort of it sounds like that in terms of like the momentum and the enemies and stuff like that. And that is a game that I think is sort of it sits up there quite highly in terms of platformers for me.
Sure.
Um, and I think that already from what you're saying and from what I've played of this, this is definitely going to be one of those games that I think about all year. And the sort of like I can already see it, you know, sort of dominating in the game of the years, especially
I
considering you seem to be enjoying it as much as you are.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot more to say about it, and we can get into more nitty-gritty in a second, I guess, but yeah,
Please.
I mean, not to bury the lead, like, yeah, it's my game of the year right now. Like, I think this is a 5. I
Yeah,
have
wicked.
I have 1 or a 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, however you whatever, we haven't
Hmm.
nailed down what our scale is.
I think I did 10 before, so, we're
Sure,
currently at
so we'll say
a
10.
7.5
We'll
scale
say
right
10. We'll
now.
say 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Because I think this is the most I've enjoyed a platformer since Celeste.
Mhm.
And that's not to say that there haven't been good ones since, but I think that's the last time I think a platformer really felt like um I don't know, like game changing, right? Where it was
Yeah.
like, oh, like this is like a shut up and pay attention type game. Um and I think this has that energy to it, and I think really my only critique of it is that I kind of wish that it had a little bit more of an eye towards world building.
Mhm.
There is like a very, very thin kind of setup at the very beginning of the story, right? It's like you play as Pepper. there is this kind of like there's been this world event that has led to um a bunch of like and I actually don't remember exactly what it is. The only reason I know this is because it says it in the guide. Hold on, it's up at the top here. It's in a world where powerful mainland nations are locked in a drawn out war, the islands, coves, and waterways surrounding their countries are now swarming with treasure seeking brigands and buccaneers. The age of piracy has returned. And that's kind of the setup. Pepper is a treasure hunter. She's got a ship full of treasure. She washes up on this island, and then the like narwhal pirate guys come and take all her loot. They've got like a kind of shady leader figure, and she discovers the grinder drill, and then goes off on a mission to get her stuff back. And it's like, I know platformers don't need to have the deepest story or anything like that, right? Like
Yeah.
to be satisfying. Obviously, I just said I love the game and it's my favorite right now. That said, I think like when I am thinking about some of the more recent you know examples of modern platformers that really stand out to me. Like I think of Shovel Knight and Celeste, and even Meat Boy, right? Like um Celeste obviously has a really strong narrative, right? Like it has a good script and is like a deep, impactful game.
Hmm.
Not everything needs to be that, but I think like Shovel Knight is something that has a way more simplistic story, but the
But it
world
works.
and the world feels very lived in and realized, right? Because you
Yes.
get a lot of personality from the different knights, you get a lot of personality from the NPCs in the towns, and you get I could describe a lot of things about that world and what it's like, and what I like about it. Um in a way that I really can't with this game. And that's a shame because I think its aesthetic and its style is really excellent. Like the pixel art is really good, the lighting is really good. I really like its use of color. Like there's a lot of really cool, interesting
The water
environments.
effects were nice from memory
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Um Above all that though, the soundtrack is phenomenal.
I was
And
going to ask if that character, if that stands up throughout the whole thing.
I really like it, and I
Yeah.
think, like, this game is definitely, like, I wanna call out that, it's like a two-person team. REC is, I believe, how you pronounce the
I
lead
think you're
developer's
right.
name,
Yeah.
and then, ZC is, I believe, how you, pronounce the musician's name. And if you wanna look them up for yourself, it's AHRECH, and is the dev, and then the musician is, XEEC. And yeah, I was blown away by the soundtrack. Like the kind of like overworld tune of like the first level is this like cool, like fucking ska rock steady like beach tune. And then the second world has this like super jazzy, like trip hop kind of sound. And then like you get into like some kind of weird, like atonal, like funky stuff at certain points. There's or not atonal, but like playing with dissonance and like weird, like kind of off kilter chords and melody and stuff like that.
Love shit like that.
um
Celeste did a lot of that as well, didn't it? Of having
yeah,
like the soundtrack for me is what stuck around and made me go back to the game and made me play it for the three
yeah,
times that I've played it
I
because
still listen to the soundtrack
no,
sometimes,
absolutely, yeah, it's
if
great
you're in the
driving
mood, right?
music,
um
great relaxing music, great
yeah.
stretch yourself out music. Like it's yeah, and I think if this game does that too, great. Like I think there's so much it goes. A soundtrack is a good way of giving a game longevity for the player to be able to revisit and feel those feelings again without having to sit through the whole game again. You know.
Yeah, and so I think to me, like that's the place I come down on it, where it's like if the one thing I can say about it is that I wish it spent more time, fleshing out its world. I think, like, that's actually a pretty good place to be, right? Because
Yeah,
it's
I
like,
agree.
it leaves space for DLC, it leaves space for a sequel, right? Like, if that's where we go, that's great. But if not, I think, its style and its personality and the aesthetic that it has, right? And the fact that it, isn't just this one box, that it does, like, give you a lot of variance among those,
Mm.
like, a relatively small number of worlds and everything, right? Um, yeah, it's just got so much going for it, and it's like, uh, I think from the first time I saw it, I connected with the fact that it had a really distinct style and that it was a game that, um, lended itself to marketing really well because you can immediately see that it had a good style and a good personality and an interesting soundtrack and that the gameplay like just looks fun, right? Like
Yes.
the sense of speed and momentum and all that stuff is just so immediately understandable.
Yeah, it's one of those games that even from the trailer, you get what the game is, you get what the core concept is, and you get the sort of the variety of what is possible of it. And it just seems to nail that really well, doesn't it? Really. I wanted to ask as well, though, level. You know, there's how many levels would you say roughly there are without spoiling? How many worlds, sorry, are there without spoiling too much?
I think I can give this part away without I mean, we're at embargo day. I think this is a reasonable question.
Yeah, sure.
There are 4 like regions,
Yeah.
uh, if memory serves. It's yeah, it's 4 or 5. 1, 2, I think it's 4.
Okay.
Um, and each one has, like a straight line of levels that you need to complete to get to the boss fight and advance to the next region. And I believe it's 5 levels per region.
Okay.
So not a small amount of levels, right? You got a solid
Right.
amount of like 20 levels, um, at least right there. And like I said, each region has a boss fight at the end, but then there's also this other mechanic, where there's kinda like because you're collecting the treasure, right, like, overall, and that's kinda just like your normal, like, overworld, like, you collect treasure in Shovel Knight, right, and then you can go and use that in the shops, to either get that, expendable armor that I told you about, or then there's also, like, a gotcha, like, sticker book,
Mhm.
system you can engage with, which, gives collectors something else to do. Um, but there's also these tokens that are, I guess kind of akin to like the strawberries in Celeste sometimes, where sometimes like they're visible and it's like a skill thing, but sometimes it'll be more like you'll discover like a side area or something like that, and it'll be like, oh, okay, like I figured out there was a tunnel down here, and I
Mhm.
found one of these pirate tokens,
So they're more
and
like the big coins in like Mario New Super Mario Brothers games where there's like
sure,
3 or 4 big coins throughout the
yeah,
level, and it's okay, you get to the end of the level, you're like, "Oh, I missed one," so you go back through trying to find it.
exactly, and
Yeah.
I think it's like 5 per level,
Okay.
and you can use those either, you can use them to like unlock some sticker stuff, as well. There's like sticker book pages that you can unlock. But then the kind of bigger thing is that for 10 of them, you can get a key from each shopkeeper, and that'll unlock a secret level on
Okay, cool.
each board.
So, does it matter what level you pick them up at, or you could, like, be collecting every single one on every level and be able to unlock these levels as soon as you get to the level then, or are
Yes.
you revisiting a lot? Okay, cool.
Yeah, you can carry them level to level, but I think that the way that they're kind of doled out, is pretty good because, like I said, there's usually 5, and I think there's usually 1 or 2 that are like pretty obvious and like more skill based of like, hey, like,
Yeah.
make sure you divvy back and get this one or whatever. Um, so like, I don't think I ever left a level with more than 3 or 4 on my first run. Like, I never found all 5 in one run just, like, naturally, which I think is good. I think it in the same way that, like, something like Super Mario World, right, like, encourages exploration and encourages you to replay levels, and Wonder did this too, right, of, like, oh, like, there's different ways to get around obstacles, there's different
Yeah.
paths you can go through, things like that, and, I think it encourages repeat plays, especially with there being, like, the time trial element as well, um, and then, yeah, you can unlock more levels.
Sure. What about level
Oh,
variety? Are there Oh,
and there's cosmetics that you can get as well that way. Like, you can
okay, cool.
change, Pepper's hair color, and she has, like, a cloak that she wears that you can change the color of too. So that's, like, another thing you can use those, like, special
Cool.
coins on. So there's
It
a lot for you to spend it on that's actually, like, stuff you wanna do, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, like,
We like cosmetics.
yeah, like, I felt incentivized to actually look for them so that I could
Mhm.
unlock every new level when it came up, and then also, like, if there was a new hairstyle that I liked or whatever, right? Like, you know, y'all know me, I'm trying to be Ramona Flowers and dye my hair every 2 weeks.
Um, so I was thinking a second ago, what about, like, not level variety in terms of, like, the mechanics and what's going on? What about, like, the theming of the levels? Because you know, you can very easily, go through entire like levels of some games and it's all very much the same. Then again, you can also have games where each level is completely different. How about the worlds themselves? Are they different themings? Is there like snow? Does it introduce more water at one point? Is it like a desert? Like how does that sort of pan out?
I want to answer that question in just a second, Max, but let me remind you that this episode of the Flip Screen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of March. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobe, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and also Boobies, Voodoo Vic, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You're all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Thank you so much for your support because it's thanks to your continued listenership and support that we were able to get this code from Devolver Digital and do this advanced review, which I'm just so thankful for because I really enjoyed my time with the game and it was super sick that I got to play it early. So thank you all so much. I hope you are enjoying the conversation. So on the level of variety, I think it does a really good job of breaking it up, and I think part of that um is the music and then the theming, like, being strong, right? Like I said, like, the first level, having that kind of, like, more, like, beach environment, right? Like, it overall feels a little bit lower stakes, but even in that, right, like, the overworld is this, like, bright beachy theme. The second level that introduces I think it's the second level, that introduces the water and the thorns that I was telling you about, that's, like, in a cave. So it like immediately has like a different, darker kind of style to it, right? And when you get to like the later levels, there's like a little bit, you get some, more like kind of guitars driven sounding music that has that like kind of intense, like, metal vibe, and things feel more underground. And there's
Hmm.
like a lot of mix of kind of like cavernous type environments because obviously like you're drilling and like there's like that sense of like dirt and all that kind of stuff. But I never had a moment where I felt like any one world didn't feel like it was a step forward, and I think part of that is also that traversal being kind of the main mechanic of the game, there are a lot of fun diversions to traversal where, like, they'll introduce things that'll kinda break it up, like, in the trailer, I'm sure folks remember, right? There's, like, scenes where you're, like, driving, like a jet ski or, like, a snowmobile,
Hmm.
but then there's also, like, a couple levels where, like, you're steering a giant mech and you're, like,
Cool.
running through this big city, and, like, the way that you move through that as you're, like, crushing buildings and stuff, is obviously much different than the way that you're using your drill and going through the ground and everything. So I think, like, that's part of it too, is that it has a good sense of, like, when you need a palate cleanser and um, when it's time to double down on something.
Yeah, keep it fresh. Yeah, yeah, that sounds variety is always good, even when it's a game like this where it's such a simple concept that it nails. To still to chuck in variety and be like, hey, we've had an idea, have fun with that idea, like, but also then to not rest on your laurels, know when to give something up. Um, that's
Yeah.
also, I think, very strong in a game.
Yeah, and there's a hmm, there's a cool escalation near the end of the game that I think also introduces a nice new flavor, and I don't wanna
Okay.
say more than that because
No,
I
I don't
think
want to know.
it's a
So
cool surprise,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I love surprises. You know me.
Um, so yeah, I think it does a really good job of having a really clear vision and sticking to it and not ever letting that vision get stale, even though it's not the same level of variance of like necessarily here's the snow level or like that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There is more cohesion, I think, in the environment, but to me, it very much feels like you're going through this journey of like you wash up on the beach and then you're working your way in towards like the heart of the island, and
Sure,
it
that makes
it, it
sense.
feels like a space that you're becoming familiar with,
Hmm.
you know?
Makes more sense thematically than, like, say, Mario, where you go in a pipe and you've gone from the Mushroom Kingdom to now you're in the desert. Now you're, in the clouds or,
In
wherever you might
space,
be.
whatever, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
It's definitely more reined in than that.
Mhm.
I think, another probably good comparison is, like, the way that, um, the levels in Celeste evolve as you're scaling the mountain, and it's like, yeah, you're
Yeah.
scaling a mountain, but it's like you're seeing it change as the altitude changes and everything, right?
Mhm. Yeah, makes sense. I was gonna ask something, I completely forgot what it was now. Oh, yeah. So it sounds like from what you're describing, that the game wait, you say it's not too there's not like an insignificant number of levels, but it also doesn't sound like it's overstaying its welcome at all. Um,
No,
how long roughly did it take you to sort of like roll credits, would you say?
yeah, I believe I rolled credits in 8 hours.
That's
It
perfect
might
amount
have
of time.
been between 8 and 10, but,
Mhm.
I
That's my
want
sweet spot now, man. That's my sweet
yeah.
spot right
I mean,
there.
I think for a platformer that invites itself to be replayed, that's a great spot to be too,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like, that's how quickly you can get a good run done of something, like any of the games I was just talking about, not Meat Boy, I guess, because that has, like, infinite levels. But, I love that about a game like Mega Man or Shovel Knight or something, right? It is like you beat it and then you beat it again in a different order, or you beat it again and I'm gonna, put this challenge on myself, or I'm gonna try
Yeah.
to, get the shortest time on every time trial, I'm still I'm still having fun playing the game even though I've beaten it, ostensibly I've seen what there is to see. It's just that fun to play, and, like, I wanna get all the collectibles, and I wanna kinda 100% it, just because 'cause I'm enjoying it. I mean, I'll tell you this, I think it speaks volumes of how much I like the game. We had 2 weeks to play it, from when we got code, and I beat it, I think, on, like, the 3rd day I had the code. So
That's yeah, you were saying to you like, "Oh, man, like, I'm gonna have to do this and this and this to play it," and then you were like, "Oh, I did it." I was like, "Oh, great, man! Like, I'm glad you were able to do it, and that you've
couldn't
had
put it
time to
down.
think about it." Yeah, and that you've sort of been going back to it, and I think, yeah, it sounds like a really strong sort of first showing as well for the developer as well. Like, I remember seeing
Yeah.
this on Twitter when it was first out, sort of like as a concept of like, here's this cool thing that I'm thinking of doing, and now looking at what seems to be a complete game, you're obviously loving it. From what you're saying, it sounds like I'm going to love it. I think that's such a massive achievement, and
I
I'm
feel like
really.
it feels like the latest kinda indie success story, like,
Mhm.
in that way of, like, yeah, like, this is just, I mean, a couple weeks ago, I remember we were on the show and we were talking about, we had a question from Steve's dad who wrote in and said, like, what what do you have concerns about the next generation of game developers, and, like, where are they gonna, these are the kind of games that, like, give you solace, right? That it's like all it takes is one person with a good idea to make something that's exceptional, and that's really special.
Mhm.
And yeah, I hope it connects with people the way that it's connecting with me, because I mean I think it will. Like, it seems like it has a lot of good buzz going into it. I think having the demos out on Switch and on Steam, and like on deck, obviously, uh, was probably really good for word of mouth and for getting people excited about it.
Yeah,
But,
I agree.
yeah, I mean, to me, this is definitely the best game I played this year, and that's not because the other games were slouches. I've played a lot of good games this year, but I think this one to me is just like, 2D platformers are a genre that's really, really near and dear to my heart, and I think that, when it's done right and when it's doing something that's, like, interesting and dynamic and innovative, it's one of the purest genres, like, 'cause it is
Yeah.
just about gameplay and, like, and how you connect with it, based on its style and all that stuff. Right, like, we were talking about it with, Abu on the interview you can check out on Steam Deck Podcast tomorrow about, like, a game's jump, right? Like, is something that, like, it's ineffable. Like, it feels good or it doesn't, and you can't really control whether it's good or not until it's good. And it's just like, this game does something unique in its momentum and in its movement, and that is special in the way that, like, you know, uh you think of, the kind of, like, verticality of Celeste, or the way that, like, you use the pogo stick in DuckTales, or the way that you and then Shovel Knight later, right? Or, like, you know, the, um the dash mechanic in Mega Man X, right? Like, something like that. Like, it has a signature mechanic, and that is something that, like, is it's so hard to just do that, to come up with that idea and then make it good, and then
Mm.
make an entire game around it where it doesn't get stale, and it doesn't overstay its welcome, and it doesn't feel too short. Like, that's such a tough line to toe, and for, a team of two people, right? Like one person for the mechanic,
Everything.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right, for almost everything. Um, is really, really an achievement, and it's something
Oh,
to be
yeah, massive.
celebrated,
Yeah.
I'm excited to see, and I mean, this is, like, the shitty thing about video games, right? Is, like, you it comes out, and I'm done with it, and I'm like, "I can't wait to see what they do next." Probably just spent the
Yeah.
last 10 years of his life working on this, right? So,
Yeah, you haven't got to wait.
but it's one of
Hey,
those.
this doors open, didn't they? And
Yeah, and it's like, you have my attention. You
mhm.
have my attention, and I think this is a game that, like, I think everybody should I said earlier, shut up and take notice, right? Like, get this game, play it, try it out for yourself, see if it's for you. If any of what I was saying connects with you, if you're a fan of any of the games I was talking about, if you're a fan of the genre and you want to see something that is, a breath of fresh air, then I think this is a game you absolutely must play this year for sure.
I mean, I'm definitely gonna be picking this one up. I'm still, like, 15 hours into Dragon's Dogma 2. I've still got loads to play, and I'm still gonna probably pick this up on launch tomorrow and give this a go. Sorry, today at the time of listening to this,
Today,
and
right
give it
now.
a go. Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, that sounds great. Have you got any final that was your final thought, really, wasn't it? Have you got
I guess, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I guess the final thing I'll leave you with is again, right now is my game of the year, baby. So I don't know what more I can
Fantastic.
say about it than that. And thank you to Devolver for the code and the
Mhm.
opportunity to review the game. And please, if you guys have questions or if you get the game today at launch and you have thoughts of your own, make sure you're right into the show and we'll talk about Max's time with it and hopefully some of your opinions on it next week.
Absolutely, yeah, this is definitely one I think we're gonna be talking about for a little while. And I think Steve this kind of thing Steve might like as well at some point.
Yeah, I'm hoping, that he gets around to it because I think he'll like it as well.
I'm saying January 2025, Pepper Grind is gonna be in all 3 of our lists, right? That's the that's
Yeah,
that's
it'll
the
be his
goal.
2025 game of the year, that'll be great.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us here on another episode of the Flip Screen Games podcast. Thank you again to Devolver Digital for the code. That's Pepper Grinder. Go check it out. It's out today, baby. So, if you wanna tune in for next week, you wanna write in, you wanna do all this stuff, you know what to do. Head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can find all the links to all the places we are all over the web. However you choose to get involved or show your support, we thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Flip Screen Games podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete, he's been Max. We'll see you next week.